My name is Daniel Mercer, and I have never liked telling this story. Every time I try, I feel as if I'm making it smaller, shrinking something that felt enormous into sentences that can't quite contain it. But lately, I've found myself thinking about that trip more and more, especially when I catch the smell of cedar smoke or hear the low hush of wind moving through wet branches. Maybe writing it down will make it sit quieter in my head. In August of 2018, my wife Laura suggested we take a family camping trip before the school year started. Our daughter Emma was 10 then, still at the age where campfires and marshmallows could eclipse the lure of her tablet. And our son, Will, was 7, full of boundless energy and unfiltered questions. I worked long hours as a surveyor, often away for stretches, so I agreed without hesitation. A long weekend in the woods felt like a chance to make up for lost time. Laura picked the spot, a forested site near Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park, a place we'd visited years earlier before the kids were born. The park ranger we spoke with at the visitor center warned us that late summer meant heavier bear activity. But if we followed standard precautions, food stored in the bear box, campsite kept clean, we'd be fine. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon after a long drive from Tacoma, the last stretch of road wound through the kind of landscape that looks untouched by time. Towering Sitka spruce, moss hanging in curtains, ferns the size of children's bicycles. When we stepped out of the car, the air was cooler than I expected, damp and resin-scented. The forest floor muffled our footsteps. Even the kids' chatter seemed absorbed by the thick green silence. Setting up camp took longer than I wanted to admit. The tent poles refused to cooperate. Will tripped over the cooler twice, and Laura had to remind me not to snap at them. When we finally got the tent upright, the kids helped collect kindling while I unpacked the small propane stove. There was something deeply satisfying about the simplicity of it all. No screens, no noise, no deadlines, just the 4 of us in the slow rhythm of the woods. That first evening, we ate pasta from a camp pot and roasted marshmallows by the fire. The lake shimmered a few hundred yards away, visible through a break in the trees. As the sun dropped, the forest turned blue and quiet, except for the occasional splash from some unseen fish. At one point, Emma asked if there were wolves out there. Laura told her no, not here, though she hesitated slightly before saying it. I noticed the pause but said nothing. I wanted the kids to sleep without worry, and besides, I'd camped in wilder places before. Olympic might be vast, but it was still national parkland, managed, safe enough for families like ours. When darkness came, it came fast. The firelight drew a soft orange bubble around us, beyond which the woods were impenetrable. I remember how clearly the stars appeared through gaps in the canopy, and how far away they looked compared to the nearness of the trees. That night I woke to the sound of movement outside the tent. It wasn't loud, just a faint crunch of leaves, a shift of weight. I reached for the flashlight beside my sleeping bag and held my breath. Laura was still asleep beside me, one arm draped across Emma's sleeping bag. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. I flicked on the light and aimed it toward the tent wall. The nylon glowed faintly, shadows shifting against it. Probably a deer, I told myself. There were plenty of them here. I listened a minute longer until the sound faded, then switched the light off and lay awake, counting my pulse until sleep finally returned. Morning made everything ordinary again. Will had tangled himself in his sleeping bag and woke up laughing about it. We made pancakes on the stove, the smell mixing with the scent of damp earth. The kids spent the morning building forts with fallen branches while Laura and I took turns reading on the picnic bench. By late afternoon, we decided to hike one of the shorter trails near the lake, Merrimere Falls, a 2-mile loop with wooden bridges and a view of the waterfall. The trail was busier than I expected, a mix of families, couples, and a few solo hikers carrying heavy packs. The forest there felt different, denser, somehow more alive. Every surface was layered with green, and the air buzzed faintly with insects. At one point, Will ran ahead to cross a footbridge and stopped halfway, peering over the railing. When I caught up, he pointed down at something in the creek. "Dad, is that an animal?" he asked. I leaned over. At first, I thought it was a log. But then I realized I was looking at an old piece of clothing, maybe a jacket, half buried in the water, its fabric dark with algae. I told him it was nothing to worry about, probably something left behind by another hiker. He seemed satisfied with that, though I caught Laura glancing back as we walked on. We reached the falls just before dusk, the last light slanting through mist. The kids took photos with the small camera I'd brought, and for a moment it felt like the kind of trip I'd always wanted us to have. Simple, memorable, untouched by the noise of the world. By the time we got back to camp, the air had turned cooler again. Laura started a fire while I took the cooler to the car, walking the short trail between the site and the gravel lot. That's when I noticed it. The faintest trace of smoke drifting through the trees, too thin to come from our own fire. I paused and looked around. Through the dimming light, I thought I saw another campsite deeper in the woods. No lanterns, just a low orange flicker. I remember thinking it was odd because the ranger had said our section of the campground was sparsely occupied. But I shrugged it off. Maybe another family had arrived late. Still, something about the angle of the smoke bothered me. It seemed to drift against the wind, sliding sideways instead of up. When I got back, Laura was helping Emma toast marshmallows. "See anyone else around?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not really. Maybe one other group over that way." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "Strange. It's quiet for a Friday." That night the woods felt heavier somehow. The fire burned low and the kids dozed in their camp chairs until we carried them to the tent. Laura turned in soon after, but I stayed outside for a while listening. Every so often, I heard a distant sound, something like a hammer striking wood, irregular and faint. Not near enough to worry about, but too steady to be random. Eventually, I doused the fire, locked the food, and crawled into the tent. The kids were breathing softly, bundled in their bags. I shut my eyes and tried to ignore the pulse of unease building in my stomach. Sometime after midnight, I woke again. This time, there was no question about the sound. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through the brush just beyond the tent. I lay still, listening to the faint crunch of needles underfoot. Whoever, or whatever, it wasn't trying to be quiet. I nudged Laura. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She stirred, frowning. "Probably a raccoon," she mumbled, half asleep. The steps paused, then shifted direction, circling toward the back of the tent. My heart hammered. I reached for the flashlight again and clicked it on. "Hey!" I called out, louder than I meant to. The movement stopped immediately. For a long moment, there was only silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, the snap of a twig under pressure. I unzipped the tent halfway and shone the beam outside. The forest looked utterly still, the undergrowth dense and motionless. The light reflected off the bare box and the curve of the car 30 feet away. No eye sheen, no movement, nothing. Laura sat up beside me now, fully awake. "Dan?"
"What is it?" "I don't know,"
I said. My voice came out lower than I expected. "Just something walking around." We listened another minute. Nothing. The night held its breath. I zipped the tent closed again and forced myself to lie back down. Every instinct told me to stay alert, but exhaustion eventually won. When morning came, everything looked normal, too normal. In that way that makes you question what you heard. The ground outside the tent was damp, and the kids were already up, laughing about who'd stolen whose blanket in the night. I checked the area around camp. No footprints stood out in the soft dirt, just the faint impressions of our own boots. Laura gave me a look as she poured coffee. "Wildlife?" she asked. "Must have been," I said, though I didn't quite believe it. We spent most of that day by the lake. The kids skipped stones and chased dragonflies, while I tried to shake off the feeling that someone had been standing close to us the night before, just beyond the light. That evening, as we were cleaning up dinner, Emma pointed toward the woods. "Dad," she said, "wasn't that our trash bag?" I followed her gaze. About 20 feet from the edge of the site, caught on a low branch, hung our heavy-duty trash bag, emptied, tied shut, and hung high like someone had placed it there on purpose. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to say. We hadn't taken the trash out yet. I'd left it near the bear box. And that's when the quiet of the forest returned, thicker than before, as if the trees themselves were listening. I stood there staring at that trash bag for longer than made sense, the smell of ash and campfire smoke still clinging to my clothes. It was one of those details that doesn't compute right away, like your brain needs time to resize what your eyes are telling you. The bag was tied perfectly, double knotted, and looped over a branch at least 10 feet up. There's no way Laura or the kids could have reached that high. Will was the first to break the silence. "Did you hang it there, Dad?" I shook my head. "No, buddy, I didn't." Laura frowned, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Maybe the ranger did. Sometimes they check for food left out." "Maybe," I said, though it didn't sound like a thing a ranger would do, especially not without a note or knock. The branch was too thin to climb, the bark damp and slick. Whoever, or whatever, had done it, they'd needed some kind of stick or tool to reach that high. I cut the bag down with my pocket knife and set it beside the bear box. Inside, everything was gone. Wrappers, leftovers, scraps. Not torn apart like an animal would have done. Just gone. Laura wanted to report it, but I convinced her to wait until morning. Could be raccoons dragged it off. I said, "Let's not spook the kids over nothing." We went through the rest of the evening pretending things were fine. The kids roasted hot dogs, and Laura told stories about camping when she was young. The forest seemed peaceful again. The earlier unease faded like a dream dissolving in daylight. After dinner, I took a walk to clear my head. The campground was quiet except for the slow drip of condensation from the trees. A few sites were occupied. One RV down by the loop road, another tent glowing dimly 100 yards off, but the section beyond our site was empty, the trail leading deeper into the forest marked with a small wooden sign backcountry access. Permit required. I followed it just far enough to feel the shift in atmosphere. The hum of insects growing louder, the smell of soil richer, heavier. I thought about how vast this place really was, how you could walk for hours without seeing another person. I was a practical man by nature, not prone to paranoia, but something about that empty stretch of woods unsettled me. When I turned back toward camp, I caught sight of a flicker through the trees again. A faint orange light, same as before, low to the ground. I stopped, squinting. Maybe another campfire, maybe not. I decided to leave it alone. Laura was sitting by our fire when I returned, the kids already zipped into the tent. She glanced up. "You hear that?" she asked quietly. "Hear what?" She pointed toward the woods behind the car. I listened. There was a faint tapping sound, rhythmic, metallic. Tink, tink, tink. It reminded me of someone lightly striking a tent stake against rock. "Been going on for 10 minutes, she said. "I thought maybe you dropped something." "No," I said. "It's coming from farther out." We both sat there, not speaking, just listening. The sound continued at irregular intervals, then stopped abruptly, leaving the night hollow and still. "Probably nothing," I said finally. "Tree branches rubbing, or I don't know. Expansion noises." Laura gave me a look that said she didn't buy it. "Dan, I think we should go tomorrow," she whispered. "Before the weekend crowd comes in." I wanted to agree, but something in me resisted. The same stubborn streak that had me rechecking locks even when I knew they were secure. "Let's see how the night goes," I told her. She didn't answer, just stood and went inside the tent. I stayed by the fire a while longer. Every now and then I'd sweep the flashlight around the perimeter of camp. Nothing, just trees, endless trunks stacked behind each other like pillars holding up the dark. Still, the sense of being watched never fully left. I finally crawled into the tent after midnight. Laura was awake, eyes open in the faint glow from the dying fire outside. "You sure?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "Go to sleep." But neither of us really did. The woods had gone dead quiet, no crickets, no owls, not even wind. That kind of silence presses on you. It makes every small sound a message. Around 2 in the morning, Will stirred and mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom. I unzipped the tent and led him toward the small clearing we designated. He was half asleep, shuffling beside me in his socks. The flashlight beam cut through the mist gathering near the ground. Halfway there, Will froze. "Dad," he said softly, pointing. I followed his gaze. 10 yards away, just beyond the nearest tree line, hung another bag. Ours again. Unmistakably, the one I'd cut down earlier. It was swinging gently, tied to a different branch, higher this time. I felt the hair on my arms lift. "Go back to the tent," I told him.
But now,
"Will, go," he obeyed, shuffling quickly back toward the tent. I waited a moment, listening for any sign of movement beyond the reach of the light. None. I took a few steps forward, heart pounding, and lifted the flashlight beam. The bag wasn't alone. There were others, smaller, darker shapes hanging farther back, spaced unevenly between the trees. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Maybe people storing food wrong, I thought. But they weren't all the same size. One looked like a torn backpack. Another, a sleeping bag maybe. The forest stayed absolutely still. I backed away until I felt the crunch of gravel under my boots again, then zipped the tent shut behind me and sat listening for what felt like an hour before sleep finally pulled me under. When dawn came, the woods felt washed clean. Sunlight spilled through the fog, and the smell of dew replaced the metallic scent of the night. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, some half-dream born of tired nerves. The kids woke cheerful, oblivious. Laura was quiet, moving briskly through breakfast. "We're leaving after lunch," she said without discussion. I didn't argue. We started packing around noon. The kids helped roll sleeping bags, and I took down the tent poles. The woods were calm again, almost too calm. But when I walked to the car to stow gear, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Under the rear bumper, stuck between the tire tracks and the soft earth, was a footprint. Bare, adult-sized. Pointed toward our tent. I stared at it, tracing the shape, the arch, the toes, though pressed deeper than the rest.
not animal, not booted.
Human. I looked around. The nearest other site was empty. The RV down the loop had gone sometime in the night. There was no one else within 100 yards. When I showed Laura, she went pale. "We're leaving." Now, we loaded the car in silence. The kids sensed something and stayed quiet for once. By early afternoon, we were rolling down the gravel road that led back toward the highway. About a mile from camp, I spotted a ranger truck parked off to the side. I pulled over and flagged the man down. He was middle-aged, beard graying, a badge stitched with the name L. Carter. He stepped out, friendly but tired-looking. "Everything all right?" I told him about the noise, the bag, the footprint. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. "Lot of folks been reporting weird stuff this summer," he said finally. "Mostly harmless. Transient campers, drifters. Sometimes people wander through the sites at night looking for food." "Barefoot?" I asked. He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the strangest thing I've seen out here. But I'll check your site, just to be sure." He gave us a polite wave and climbed back into his truck. As we drove off, I watched him in the rearview mirror until he disappeared around the bend. The highway came as a relief. Open air, sunlight, movement. But about 20 minutes later, when we stopped at a gas station in Port Angeles, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Dad," she said, "that ranger, he looked just like the man I saw last night." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She frowned, thinking. "When I woke up to get water, I saw someone standing by the car. I thought it was you. But he had that same hat, that same jacket." I forced a smile. "Probably just your imagination, Emma. You were half asleep." She nodded slowly but didn't seem convinced. We drove the rest of the way home without stopping. The farther we got from the forest, the easier it was to breathe. By the time we reached Tacoma, the whole thing already felt like it belonged to another world. That night, after the kids were in bed, Laura found me on the back porch, staring into the dark yard. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" she asked. I thought about the ranger's eyes, how steady they'd been, how he hadn't written anything down. "I don't know," I said, "but I keep thinking about that footprint." She sat beside me, pulling her sweater tighter. "It's over now," she whispered. I wanted to believe her, but when I took out the cooler to clean it the next morning, I noticed something on the side, a small smear of mud shaped like a palm print. Just one, near the latch. The next few weeks passed in the way unsettling things often do. Slow at first, then suddenly forgotten under the noise of work, chores, and routine. The kids went back to school. Laura buried herself in lesson plans, and I returned to the steady rhythm of site inspections across Pierce County. The forest became just a story we didn't tell, a thing that stayed behind us in the green hush of Olympic. But I never stopped thinking about that footprint. Sometimes driving alone before dawn, I'd catch myself glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind me. It wasn't fear so much as unease that wouldn't fade, a kind of knowing that whatever had stood out there in the dark hadn't just been someone passing through. It had been patient, close, watching. One evening in late September, I got home after a long day. The kids were in bed, and Laura was sitting at the dining table with her laptop, sorting through photos from the trip. She looked up as I came in, her expression unreadable. "Dan," she said quietly, "you should see this." She turned the screen toward me. The image showed the four of us by the lake on our second day, Emma holding a stick, Will grinning with marshmallow smeared on his cheek. In the background, between two spruce trees, a shadow leaned at the edge of frame. At first, I thought it was just that, a shadow, or maybe a dark patch of bark. But then I saw the shape of it, the suggestion of a shoulder, the faint outline of a head tilted slightly downward, as though watching. I felt my stomach drop. "Where'd you find this?" "It was in the memory card," she said. "I don't remember taking it." Neither do the kids. I leaned closer. The figure wasn't in focus, but there was something distinct about it, a sort of symmetry that didn't match the surrounding trees. Too smooth, too deliberate. Could be a trick of light, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Laura closed the laptop slowly. "You think it's him, don't you?" "I don't know who is." "Whoever was out there." I didn't answer. I didn't want to feed the thought. For a while, we said nothing. Then Laura whispered, "I've been dreaming about that place. About waking up and hearing someone outside the tent again. Only this time, it's not walking. It's just standing there." I didn't tell her that I'd been having the same dreams. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a park ranger, different name this time, Henderson, asking if we'd stayed near Lake Crescent in August. My pulse quickened as he explained there'd been an incident near the same campground. A site found abandoned, tent slashed open, food left uneaten, no sign of the campers. "Anything like that happen while you were there?" he asked. I hesitated. "Not exactly. Just strange noises. A missing bag." He sighed. "You wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that this summer. Was it animals? Could be. But the thing is," he paused, "we found something hanging in a tree near the site. Looked like a jacket. Stitched name tag said Mercer. That ring a bell." My throat went dry. "That's my name." "Yeah, figured." Could have been coincidence, but it matched the registration log. "Maybe something you left behind." "No," I said. "We packed everything." He made a non-committal sound. "All right. Just thought I'd check. We'll send it back if you want." I told him not to bother. That Laura found me sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my work clothes. I told her about the call. She went quiet, her eyes distant. "We didn't leave a jacket there," she said. "No," I agreed. "We didn't." We decided not to talk about it in front of the kids, but I caught Emma looking at us the next morning with that sharp intuition kids have. "Is this about the woods?" she asked. I forced a smile. "No, honey. Just grown-up stuff." She didn't believe me. In early October, I took a job up near Port Angeles, a short survey contract for a logging company. I told myself it was coincidence, the same county as the park, but miles inland. Still, the drive along Highway 101 stirred something heavy in my chest. The air smelled the same, salt and pine and rain-soaked soil. On my second day there, as I was marking boundary points with a colleague, I noticed a figure standing at the far end of a clearing, near the tree line. Too far to make out details, but tall, still hands at its sides. "See that?" I asked my coworker, a guy named Trevor. He squinted. "What?" trees, I turned back. The figure was gone. "Never mind," I said. He laughed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just thought I did," I muttered. That night I stayed in a cheap motel. The rain hit the windows in thin, steady sheets. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the walkway outside my door. Not hurried, measured, deliberate, I froze, listening as they stopped right in front of my room. After a few seconds, there was a knock. Soft. Once, then nothing. I waited. When I finally looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. The next morning, a muddy handprint marked the glass of my truck's passenger window. I told no one. When I got home the following evening, Laura noticed immediately that something was wrong. I told her everything. She listened, pale and still. "We need to call someone," she said. "The police, the park service, anyone." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That a man might be following us from a national park." "With what proof?" She didn't answer. The following weekend, I tried to put things back to normal. We took the kids apple picking, met friends for brunch. By Sunday night, for the first time in weeks, the house felt calm again. Until I took the trash out. It was dark, the street quiet except for the soft hum of a neighbor's sprinkler. I carried the bin to the curb, flipped the lid, and froze. Inside, sitting neatly atop the black bags, was one of our camping utensils. A metal spatula handle blackened from the fire. The same one we'd used to cook that first night. I hadn't seen it since. I checked the garage. Every piece of camping gear was accounted for. Tent, cooler, stove, chairs. All where they should be. Nothing else missing. Just that one object, placed carefully in the trash can like a reminder. That night, Laura locked every window. The next day, I called Ranger Henderson again. He said he'd looked into our registration file. "Here's the odd part," he told me. "The logbook shows 2 entries under your name. Same spelling, same address. But one signed in 2 days after you checked out." My mouth went dry. "What?" He cleared his throat. "Could be clerical error, or someone using your details. But the handwriting didn't match the first signature." "Did they stay long?" "Just one night," he said. "Then gone before dawn." I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house seemed magnified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the pipes, the soft tick of the hallway clock. I kept replaying the ranger's words, same name, different hand. By the following week, Laura had started leaving lights on overnight. Emma complained that her curtains moved on their own. Will said he saw a man standing across the street while waiting for the bus, wearing that same hat the ranger had. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself a lot of things. But then, one morning before sunrise, I stepped outside to warm up the car. The air was damp cold. The windshield was fogged, and when I wiped it clear with my sleeve, I saw something written there in the condensation. A S-E-E-O-U, a J-N. The words vanished as quickly as they appeared, melting into streaks of water. I stood there, hand trembling slightly, and for the first time in my life I didn't know whether to call the police or just drive until the tank was empty. Instead, I went back inside. Laura saw my face and didn't ask. We both knew we'd already made a choice, to pretend it wasn't happening, to let it fade. But pretending doesn't make things go away. It only teaches them how to wait. A few days later, a package arrived at our doorstep. No return label, just our address written neatly in black marker. Inside was a single photograph, printed on glossy paper. It showed our campsite, the tent, the fire pit, the car, taken from a distance as if through trees. The timestamp in the corner read 20:17 a.m. There was no note. I took it straight to the police, who filed a report but offered little hope. "Could be prank," the officer said. "People pull weird stunts with found footage." But he didn't have an answer for how someone had gotten our address. That night, Laura insisted we stay at her sister's house across town. The kids thought it was an adventure, sleeping on couches, eating popcorn late. For them, it was temporary. For me, it felt like an admission. Before bed, I stepped outside for air. The neighborhood was quiet, the sky low with clouds. Across the street, near the edge of the cul-de-sac, a man stood by the lamppost. Not moving, not hiding. The light caught his hat, his jacket, and something else. A faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. I blinked and he was gone. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat awake until dawn. We moved houses 3 months later. The police never found who sent the photo, and the Park Service eventually stopped returning my calls. Life went on as it always does, stretching over what happened like fresh snow over old tracks. But sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I still wake thinking I hear that slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps outside the tent. And in the dark, before I convince myself it's nothing, I always look toward the window, just to be sure no one's standing there, waiting. It's strange how quickly people convince themselves that a new house means a new life. We moved to Olympia in February, a modest 2-story on a quiet street with maples that dropped orange leaves like paper embers. The neighborhood was calm, retirees, young families, the kind who waved from driveways. For a while, the simple normalcy of it worked. The kids made friends, Laura found a new rhythm teaching, and I buried myself in work. The old house sold easily. We never mentioned the incident to the buyers. How do you explain something like that? A man we don't know kept finding us. We think he came from the woods. You can't. You just hand over the keys and hope the past doesn't have a forwarding address. At first, it almost felt like we'd left it behind. The new house smelled of paint and sawdust, not pine and damp earth. Nights were quiet in the good way, the kind where you could hear sprinklers turning on and distant trains moving through the dark. But comfort has a half-life. A few weeks after the move, Emma started having nightmares again. She'd wake screaming, saying she heard footsteps on the roof. I'd go up there with a flashlight every time. Empty shingles, just the hum of wind through the vent pipes. I told her it was raccoons. She nodded, pretending to believe me. Then came the package. It arrived on a Wednesday, mid-morning. Laura texted me at work. "Did you order something from Port Angeles?" I hadn't. The return label said nothing but that town name in faint block letters. Inside was a thin wooden carving, a small figure, crudely shaped like a person. Its arms were outstretched, the grain of the wood darkened with something oily. Laura threw it out before I came home. When I asked what it looked like, she just said, "Ugly," and changed the subject. I wanted to forget it, but that night, after everyone was asleep, I went out to the bin and pulled it from the trash. The wood was rough, hand-carved, the kind of work you'd do with a dull knife. On the back, someone had etched 3 letters LM. I put it in the garage behind a toolbox. I don't know why I didn't destroy it. Maybe I needed proof that what we'd gone through had been real. Days passed. Work, dinners, homework. Life resumed its shape. But the feeling of being observed crept in again, slow as fog. I'd catch myself pausing halfway through locking the door, glancing down the street for no reason. One night around 11, I stepped outside to take the trash out. The street was empty, the air cold enough to see my breath. As I rolled the bin to the curb, I noticed something odd. Mud smeared in a rough arc across the driveway, like someone had dragged a foot. It wasn't from me. My shoes were dry. The next morning, Laura found the garage door slightly open. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed except the carving. It was gone. We didn't talk about it in front of the kids. They'd been settling too well to risk shaking that fragile piece. But that night, when Laura came to bed, she whispered, "I think we made a mistake moving here." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I couldn't. A few days later, I got a call from Ranger Henderson again, the one who'd spoken to me about the jacket. His tone was casual, but there was weight behind it. "Miss Mercer, I don't mean to alarm you," he said, "but we've had some odd developments up here. You mind if I ask, your family hasn't been back near Olympic, have they?" "No," I said. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because someone checked into the Lake Crescent campsite last weekend under your name again." My grip tightened on the phone. "You're sure?" "Positive. Same signature as before. Even listed the same Tacoma address." I stared out the window at the dark yard, the motion light flickering once before settling. "Did you see them?" "No," he said. "The staff only found the entry in the morning. No gear, no car, just a few things left behind." "What kind of things?" He sighed. "A couple of sticks tied together with twine, and a family photo burned around the edges. Yours, I think. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I told Laura everything. She went pale and sat down hard on the edge of the bed. How does he keep finding us? She whispered. I don't know, I said. But if he wanted to hurt us, he's had plenty of chances. That's supposed to make me feel better. We argued quietly, trying not to wake the kids. She wanted to move again farther away. I told her it wouldn't matter if we didn't understand what we were running from. The next morning, I checked the mailbox before leaving for work. Inside was a single envelope, no stamp, no postmark, just our last name, Marcier, scrawled in heavy pencil. I opened it right there at the curb. Inside was a Polaroid. It showed the front of our house taken from across the street. The photo was blurry, grainy, but you could make out the time of day, night, porch light on. Through the front window, faintly, were the silhouettes of 4 figures, me, Laura, Emma, and Will. No message that evening. I went door to door asking neighbors if they'd seen anyone unfamiliar. Most shook their heads. One man, an older retiree named Collins, said, "You mean that guy with the ranger hat?" My stomach turned. When? He thought for a second. Couple days ago, standing by the stop sign around 9, didn't wave, just watched the street for a while. I thanked him, went home, and closed every curtain in the house. For the next week, I drove a different route to work each morning, checking mirrors more often than I should have. Nothing. But each night, when I stepped outside, I felt that same pressure in the air, the sense of being measured from a distance. Then came the night the power went out. It was around 10:30. The house went black all at once. Lights, furnace, everything. The silence after was so total it felt wrong, like the world had gone flat. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped onto the porch. The whole neighborhood was dark. A wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of wet earth. I stood there, scanning the yards, when I saw movement near the end of our driveway. A figure, standing still. The beam of my flashlight caught the brim of a hat, wide, park ranger style. My chest tightened. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. The figure shifted slightly, one slow step forward. I raised the light higher, but in the second it took to adjust, the shape was gone. By the time I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just wet grass and the faint outline of shoe prints. Bare again. The power came back 5 minutes later. I didn't sleep the next morning. I took the kids to school early and filed a police report. The officer, polite but disinterested, said they'd increase patrols for a while. "Probably a prowler," he said. "Happens more than you'd think." When I got home, Laura was in the kitchen, pale and silent, holding something in her hands. It was the carving, the same one that had vanished from the garage. She set it on the table carefully. "It was on the porch," she said, "in front of the door. The back of it was different now. The letters LM had been carved deeper, and underneath new ones. ONP Olympic National Park." We sat there for a long time, staring at that little piece of wood like it could explain itself. I don't know what it means. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe someone just found our old stuff and decided to scare us. But some nights, when the air is still and the house settles into silence, I catch the faint scent of cedar smoke through the open window, sharp, unmistakable, like the fire from that first night at Lake Crescent. I close the window every time, and yet, when I wake in the morning, it's always open again. The police never found anything. They came by twice that week, walked the yard, took photos of the carving, promised follow-up calls that never came. By the time they left, the whole thing already felt like a footnote in their day, something to file and forget. Laura didn't forget. She started keeping the bedroom lamp on all night. I'd find her standing at the window long after midnight, watching the street the way someone might study a horizon for smoke. The kids felt it too. Emma stopped inviting friends over, and Will began sleeping with the flashlight clutched in his hand. One evening I suggested we take a short trip, somewhere inland, just a weekend, to breathe different air. Laura agreed. We packed light and drove east toward Yakima, a quiet cabin rental near Cowish Canyon. The drive was long but peaceful, the kind of open road that almost tricks you into thinking the world is still simple. By the time we arrived, The sun had dropped behind the ridge, leaving the sky streaked in violet and red. The cabin smelled of dust and cedar, familiar but clean. There was no television, no signal, just the steady hum of wind through dry grass. It was exactly what we needed. For the first day it worked. The kids explored the trails near the creek, collecting smooth stones and dried seed pods. Laura smiled again, real and unguarded. That night we cooked over the small stove, laughed about burned sausages, and watched the stars come out. For a few hours, I believed we'd finally outrun whatever had been following us. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of knocking. Not loud. 3 soft raps, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was the wind shifting the shutters. But when I sat up, I realized it was coming from the front door. Laura stirred beside me. "What was that?" "Stay here," I whispered. I grabbed the flashlight, crossed the small living room, and peered through the curtain. Nothing. The porch was empty, bathed in pale starlight. I opened the door anyway, heart drumming, and stepped outside. The air was cold, the kind that makes sound carry farther. From somewhere beyond the cabin came the faint creak of a wooden gate. I swept the light toward it. The gate swayed once, then stilled. And there, hanging from the latch, was another carving, smaller than the first, this one painted red. I stood frozen until the light began to flicker. When I picked it up, I saw the back, etched deep enough to score the wood. STY. I burned that one in the stove before sunrise. Laura didn't ask. She didn't have to. We left the cabin 2 hours later, driving in silence until the kids fell asleep in the back seat. When we reached home, the mailbox was open. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, sat the first carving, the one we'd locked in the police evidence bag days earlier. No note. That was the breaking point for Laura. She called her sister and arranged for us to stay indefinitely. I didn't argue. We packed what we could fit in the car and drove south to her place near Vancouver, Washington. I told myself we'd stay a week or 2, long enough for the tension to fade again. But distance didn't change much. It just gave the fear room to breathe. The second night there, while putting Will to bed, I found him staring at the window. "He's not mad," he said quietly. I felt my chest tighten.
"Who, Bud?"
"The man from the park. He just wants to make sure we don't forget." I tried to smile, but my mouth felt stiff. "You're having a dream again." He shook his head.
No.
He told me. I didn't tell Laura what he'd said. The next day, I went for a drive alone, half to clear my head, half to convince myself the world still worked by rules I understood. I ended up in a small diner off the highway. While paying the check, I noticed a man sitting 2 booths over, facing the window. He wore a brown jacket and a hat pulled low. His posture was unmistakable, straight-backed, unmoving. When I left, I glanced once more. The seat was empty. That night, the house alarm tripped at 20:17 a.m., the exact time stamped on that old photograph. I rushed downstairs, heart in my throat. The motion sensor in the living room was blinking red, but nothing looked disturbed. No broken glass, no door ajar. Except on the table, beside the lamp, sat my phone. It had been charging in the bedroom when I fell asleep. The screen was lit with a single notification, new voicemail. No missed call. Hands shaking, I pressed play, static first. Then a voice, faint, slow mine. "Everything's fine," it said, dragging the last word into something almost distorted. "We're safe now." The same message I'd left for Laura from the woods years ago. I deleted it, threw the phone against the couch, and sat there until the first light crept through the blinds. In the morning, Laura found me on the porch, pale and hollow-eyed. "We can't keep running," she said softly. "It's not helping." "I know," I said, "but what else is there?" She looked out at the yard, where Emma and Will were drawing on the pavement with chalk. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," I said. "He doesn't have to. He just has to remind us." We stayed at her sister's another week. On the last morning, as I loaded the car, I noticed something carved into the wooden fence by the driveway. The lines were shallow but unmistakable. SEOAJIN. The same words that had appeared on the fog windshield months ago. I ran my hand over the letters, feeling the rough edges where the knife had bitten wood. They weren't fresh. Whoever made them had done it before we'd arrived. Maybe before the house was even built. I didn't tell Laura. That evening on the drive home, the kids fell asleep early. The highway stretched empty ahead, the world softening into dusk. Laura rested her head against the window. For a few brief miles, it felt like peace again. Then, somewhere past Chehalis, the radio flickered on by itself. Just static at first, then faint voices underneath, blurred and overlapping. I reached to turn it off, but a phrase cut through, clear as a whisper right beside my ear. Turn around. I pulled over hard, heart pounding. The road behind us was empty. When I looked back at Laura, she was staring at the side mirror, eyes wide. "Dan," she said quietly, "someone's walking in the road." I turned. In the wash of our taillights, far back down the highway, a figure moved through the red glow. Slow, steady, barefoot. We drove without stopping until the tank was nearly dry. When we reached home, the porch light was already on. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for one thing. The wooden carving was sitting upright on the kitchen counter, its arms outstretched as if waiting to be picked up. This time, a new word had been cut into the base. Om. I wrapped it in a towel, took it outside, and smashed it to splinters with a hammer. Then I lit a fire in the metal drum behind the shed and burned every piece until only ash remained. The smoke rose slow and gray, carrying that same cedar scent I couldn't escape. When the last ember died, I thought maybe, finally, we were free. But the next morning, footprints led from the ash pile to the back steps. Bare, perfectly shaped, facing the house. I didn't tell anyone about the footprints. Not that morning, not that week. There are things you stop saying out loud when people start worrying about your sanity. Even Laura had reached that quiet stage of fear where silence feels safer than questions. I tried to treat them like they weren't there. I swept the dirt. I washed the steps. I buried the burned ash under the mulch behind the shed. It was all for show. Not for whoever left them, but for myself. I wanted to believe I could erase proof, and with a memory, that evening, we went through motions of normal life. Dinner, homework, the news playing low in the background. The kids argued about cartoons. For a moment, it was almost ordinary again. Then Will asked, "Can we go camping again soon?" The question hit like a stone to the chest. Laura and I both froze. "Not for a while," she said gently. "Let's give it some time." He nodded, thoughtful. "Because of the man?" Her fork paused midair. "What man?" "The one from the window," he said. "He's not mad anymore." I made some excuse about bad dreams and changed the subject. But that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I checked his window. Nothing there. Just the faint reflection of my own face in the glass, pale under the porch light. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went outside for air. The yard was still wrapped in mist. When I turned toward the shed, my breath caught. The footprints were back. Not one or two, a line of them. Starting at the far end of the yard, crossing the lawn, stopping at the back steps again. Bare, adult-sized. I knelt down, tracing one with my hand. The dirt was damp and cold. The print was pressed deep, fresh within the hour. I backed up, scanning the fence line. Nothing moved. No sound. No wind. I didn't go back inside for nearly an hour, waiting for some sign that someone had been there. A noise. A shadow. Anything. There was none. Just those quiet impressions of someone who had come close enough to the door to look in. The next morning, Laura found me sitting at the kitchen table, still in the clothes I'd worn outside. She didn't ask what I'd seen. She didn't have to. That afternoon, she packed a bag for the kids and drove them to her sister's again. "A few days," she said, "just until we figure things out." She kissed my forehead before leaving. It felt final, though neither of us said so. For the first time in months, I was alone in the house. You'd think solitude would feel like relief. It didn't. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks. That tense, waiting pressure in the air. Every sound carried weight. The creak of the floorboards, the refrigerator hum, the faint ticking of the baseboard heater. That night I slept on the couch, light on, phone within reach. I must have drifted off around 1:30. The knock came at 3:12. Soft, patient, the kind that expects to be answered. I sat up, pulse thudding. The sound came again, 3 slow taps, exactly like at the cabin. My first thought was that Laura had come back early, but when I looked through the peephole, the porch was empty. I opened the door anyway. At first, I saw nothing. Then, in the far edge of the yard, a shape shifted. Tall, still half shrouded by fog. "Who's there?" I called. No reply. The figure didn't move. Just stood, barely visible, hands at its sides. Something in me broke then. I stepped out barefoot onto the porch, adrenaline dulling the cold. "What do you want?" I shouted. Still nothing. I took 1 step down, then another. The air seemed to thicken with every breath. When I reached the middle of the yard, I realized the shape wasn't standing still at all. It was swaying, slow, side to side, like a tree in wind that wasn't there. I froze. And then it was gone. Not in a blink, not vanished. Just gone, like the darkness had folded in around it. I ran back inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor until dawn. When sunlight finally came, I forced myself to go back out. The grass was damp, silver with dew. No footprints this time, but on the porch rail, carved into the wood, were 2 words, Stielhari. I called the police again. They came, took photos, nodded, promised patrols. They never found anyone. Laura stayed at her sister's longer than planned. I visited on weekends. The kids seemed lighter there, like whatever followed us hadn't learned their names yet. But even then, I noticed Emma locking the bathroom door when she brushed her teeth, and Will asking if the ranger man could find houses the way he found tents.
I told him no, I didn't believe it.
One weekend, Laura asked me to pick up the last few boxes from the old house. She didn't want to go back, and I couldn't blame her. I drove down Sunday morning, intending to be quick. The neighborhood looked the same, too normal. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt, like returning to a dream you'd half forgotten. When I pulled into the driveway, the front door was unlocked. I stopped cold. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen counters were clean. But the back door stood slightly ajar, letting in a thin draft of cold air. I should have turned around. Instead, I stepped inside. There was a sound upstairs, faint, rhythmic, like something being dragged lightly across the floor. "Hello." My voice sounded small in the hollow space, no answer. I took the stairs slowly, hand tight on the railing. The sound stopped when I reached the landing. The hallway was empty except for a line of damp footprints, leading from the bathroom door to Will's old room. Each step darkened the carpet slightly, as though still wet. I followed them. The door to Will's room was half open. Inside, morning light slanted through the blinds, catching dust in long stripes. On the floor, propped neatly against the bed frame, was a photograph. It showed me, standing in the same doorway, flashlight in hand, taken from inside the room. The timestamp at the bottom read 3:12 a.m. I don't remember leaving. I only remember the cold air hitting my face once I was outside, lungs burning as if I'd been running for miles. When I got back to Laura's sister's house, I told her what I'd found. She didn't speak. She just covered her mouth and nodded like she'd already known it would end this way. We called the police one last time. They took the photo, promised to investigate, and never called back. It's been 6 months since then. We've moved again, farther south near Eugene, Oregon. A small house surrounded by fields, open sightlines, no dense woods. For a while, it worked, but the quiet out here isn't comfort. It's a waiting kind of silence. Some nights, when fog settles low across the field, I catch myself watching the fence line for movement. Last week, after a heavy rain, I found a single footprint by the back steps. Bare, facing the house. I didn't tell Laura. She doesn't need to know. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, staring out the window toward the dark field. At some point, I realized I'd been holding my breath. And then, faint, almost polite, came a knock at the glass beside me. 3 times. Slow, I turned my head. Nothing there, just my reflection, pale and small against the dark. Except behind my reflection, for a fraction of a second, another shape, taller, still, wearing a hat. I blinked and it was gone, but the glass stayed cold long after I moved away. The truth is, I stopped expecting answers a long time ago. Whatever started back at Lake Crescent had outgrown explanation. It wasn't something I could report or reason with. It just stayed, waiting for the quiet to return so it could remind us it was still there. I used to think the fear would dull with time, that once you live alongside it long enough, it becomes background noise. But fear doesn't fade, it adapts. It learns your rhythms, your weak hours, the moments you let your guard down. And lately, mine have been around dawn. That's when the fog settles low around our new house in Eugene, wrapping the field in pale ribbons. When everything feels muted, still, almost peaceful, until it isn't. The kids have adjusted better than I have. They bike to school, feed the neighbors' goats, collect river stones. They laugh again. Sometimes it almost sounds normal. But Emma keeps her curtains shut tight, and Will doesn't like being alone outside after sunset. Laura doesn't talk about Olympic anymore. She packs lunches, grades papers, keeps the radio low. But I can tell she's watching me, waiting for me to say I've seen something again. I haven't. Not exactly. But some nights, when I take the trash out, I can feel the air change. That dense stillness. The way sound bends, like the forest back then when we thought we were alone. Last week I caught the scent again. Cedar smoke. Faint but to smoke. Carried on the wind from nowhere. I followed it out to the fence line, scanning the field with a flashlight. The beam caught only fog and grass. When I came back inside, Laura was sitting at the table, hands wrapped around a mug. "It's happening again, isn't it?" she said softly. I didn't answer. She stared at me a long time, then said, "Maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's just something we brought back with us." Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. She didn't mean it as superstition. She meant memory. The kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave. I wanted to believe her. To think this was all trauma, residue, something explainable. But that night, I dreamed of the woods again. I was standing by the lake, mist curling off the surface, our old tent just visible through the trees. Only it wasn't night. It was morning. That same gray, blue hour right before light breaks. The air was full of static, like the world was holding its breath. Across the water, on the opposite shore, someone stood watching. I couldn't see his face, but I recognized the stance. Still, head slightly bowed, arms loose at the sides. When I woke, my heart was racing. My hands smelled faintly of ash. I told myself it was a dream, a perfectly rational product of stress and memory. But when I went downstairs, there was a muddy footprint by the back door. Just one, facing in. The next day, I drove north. To clear my head, I said, but I think I already knew where I was going. Olympic. The park had always pulled at me, even when I swore I'd never go back. Some part of me thought that if I saw it again, it would lose its power. If I could stand there, alive and unafraid, maybe the story would end. I reached Lake Crescent just before dusk. The water was flat and dark, reflecting a sky the color of steel. The same ranger station still stood near the trailhead, though it looked emptier now. A man came out as I approached. Not Henderson. Younger. He gave a polite nod. "Can I help you?" "I used to camp here," I said. 5 years ago. With my family." He smiled faintly. "Lots of folks do. I just wanted to see it again." "Sure." Trails open till sundown. I started down the familiar path. Every sound, the crunch of gravel, the soft buzz of insects, felt heavier than it should have. When I reached the old site, the clearing looked smaller, as if the trees had been closing in over the years. The fire pit was gone, filled with dirt and ferns. But in the center of the clearing stood something new. A wooden post about chest high with a small sign nailed to it. "Campsite's lusty." Abantura below that, carved into the post itself, were initials burned deep into the grain. LM. I stared at them until the light shifted, until the shadows from the trees stretched long and the lake turned to glass. That's when I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not from behind me, across the water, faint but clear, like someone tapping wood against stone. I froze. The sound came again, then stopped. For a long minute, there was only wind and the distant ripple of water. Then, faintly, a voice. "Lau, male, everything's fine." My own words. The message I'd left for Laura that night years ago. I don't remember walking back to the car. I only remember the silence pressing against me, the weight of it, and the certainty that I was being watched the whole way. It was full dark by the time I hit the highway. I should have felt relief, distance, escape, but instead I felt hollow, like whatever had been waiting in those woods had finally seen me again and smiled. When I got home, Laura was asleep on the couch. The kids' backpacks were by the door. For a while I just stood there, watching them breathe, the quiet so fragile it hurt. Then I noticed the smell, cedar, stronger this time. I followed it down the hall to the kitchen. The window above the sink was open an inch, though I'd closed it that morning. On the counter beneath it sat a single Polaroid. The flash had caught my face, blurred by motion. Behind me, through the window glass, a dark outline stood outside. Tall, motionless, hat brim cutting a perfect arc across the reflection. The timestamp read 5:13 a.m., 20 minutes before I'd woken up. I tore the photo in half, then in half again. But that doesn't erase an image once you've seen it. It stays behind your eyelids. The next few nights were dreamless, empty, almost peaceful. I started believing that maybe it was done. That acknowledgement was enough. That going back to the park had severed whatever tie there'd been. Then, yesterday morning, Emma found something in the yard. A wooden carving. This one was smaller, simpler like the others, but freshly made. Its arms weren't outstretched this time. They were folded across its chest, palms flat, like someone at rest. On the back, carved carefully, were two words, Kyo-yu. I didn't know what to do with it. Burn it. Keep it. Pretend it wasn't real. I left it on the porch rail while I went to work. When I came home, it was gone. Laura said she never saw it. The kids didn't either. But that night, when I stepped outside before bed, I found it again, sitting on the ground, just beyond the porch light, half buried in mud. The message on the back had changed. The words were gone, replaced by new ones carved over the old E. S-E-A-U-A-G-A-N. I don't know how long I stood there. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. The trees along the edge of the field were perfectly still. And then, from somewhere far off, too far to see but close enough to hear, came the sound of wood striking wood 3 times. Soft, steady, certain. I turned off the porch light. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see how dark it could really get. Now I sit here at the kitchen table, writing this down because it feels like the only way to prove I haven't lost my mind. The house is quiet. The others are asleep. I keep thinking about the first time I saw him, or thought I did, outside that tent at Lake Crescent. How I told myself it was nothing. Maybe that was the real mistake, not the trip, not the running, the disbelief, the arrogance of thinking you can look into the dark and decide it has nothing to do with you. It's 2:58 a.m. as I finish this. The window beside me is open again. The air smells like rain and cedar, and from the field, just past the reach of the light, I can hear someone walking. Barefoot, slow, deliberate. The sound stops right at the porch. Then 3 soft knocks, not asking, not warning, just reminding. Still here, still waiting.